Another way in which your book reads against the grain of conventional liberal internationalist understandings is people will acknowledge the United States has, after World War II, maintained global ambitions. But unlike previous hegemons, unlike Hitler or Stalin or Napoleon, we encased what we were trying to do in these world organizations, right? But you have a somewhat different reading. Your argument, as I understand it, is that the reason why we pick up the idea of the United Nations is not because we want to create a global parliament of man, but rather because it's only by creating some figment of institutionalization and broad participation that now the people who are styling themselves as internationalists think they're going to be able to sell US long-term supremacist ambitions to an American people whose public opinion, a term that was pretty new at that time, they're concerned will drive people back or drive the country back into a posture of standoffishness from the rest of the world. Is that right?
That's right. So if there was a time when American leaders wanted to create a parliament of man, it was through the League of Nations or alternatives that were aired at the end of World War I, where states would commit to settle their disputes in an international court, or the League of Nations was conceived as a forum for public opinion to express itself for the kind of harmony that was assumed by some of these internationalists to exist latent in the world would actually be expressed through the halls of the League of Nations and the assembly, the precursor to what we know now as the UN General Assembly. The United Nations was not the kind of culmination of or outgrowth from the League of Nations vision. What I show, and the sequencing is really important here, is that first in 1940 and 41, US planners rejected the League of Nations and any universalist scheme as being completely inadequate to provide for world order in the future. It was precisely because such a scheme had failed that the United States, in tandem perhaps with other great powers, especially the British Empire as of 1941, the United States needed to take the lead and project its military power around the world. So it was precisely because the old style of internationalism had failed that the United States had to become the armed hegemon of the world. Having gone through that transformation, then they asked themselves after Pearl Harbor, okay, how do we actually make this vision happen? And to my surprise, sitting there in the National Archives, reading these documents, there was a kind of moment of decision in 1942 among post-war planners that something that looked like, smelled like the old League of Nations, or what we'd call today a rules-based world order, had to be created. The point wasn't to actually create rules that could transcend power politics or seriously inhibit the projection of power by the United States. The whole point was to enable the projection of power by the United States. And that is how we get the UN and the UN system. And if you think about it that way, even though we're used to the UN coming under attack by nationalist forces in the United States, if you think about the logic of the architects of the UN, it starts to explain some things about our recent history and US history since 1945. It turns out, the US Congress hasn't declared war since World War II. Part of the reason is that when we can go through the United Nations, that provides an appearance of legitimacy and legality to a military operation that can substitute for the consent of Congress. So it happened in the Korean War, for example. And in our own time, we've seen, a search for some kind of legitimacy when the Obama administration was looking to strike Syria. Maybe it could get at the UN. No, it couldn't. Maybe it could get it from NATO. Maybe it needed it from Congress, and it ultimately got it from nowhere, and the strike did not happen at that time.